Oops, you want to do that? Share my screen. There we go. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Glad to see you all joining us again for our early morning pajama party. So I want to start this morning with, excuse me, first of all, thanking our sponsors. As I always do, we really appreciate it that they enabled us to be here. So I want to thank you all: United Way, Care First Arizona, Khajiit, and the Satellite Broadcasters Association. So appreciate that. And I'm having some computer issues today. So let me get rid of this here. Oops. This is what I want. There we go. Okay. So again, want to welcome you all this morning. And I also, since he's going to have to leave fairly soon, I want to welcome Wes Brownfield, who we haven't seen for a while. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. And welcome back, Wes. And many of you have asked about Wes and where he's been and so forth. So I'm going to let him tell you. Welcome back, Wes.
Well, thank you, Steve. Contrary to popular opinions and a few people's hopes, I was not abducted by aliens. It's just that as executive director of Arizona Rural Schools, one of my main functions is to manage our annual conference in September up at Little America. And since I'm a one-man show, come about the end of June, early part of July, I essentially become a life support system for a conference. And since a conference is a very good way to fail spectacularly and publicly, it takes all my attention, which is still no excuse. I could always have checked in for 30 minutes every morning, every Monday morning, and said hello to everyone. And then, lo and behold, I get a breakthrough case of COVID-19, which, I've been fully vaccinated. And 2 weeks ago, I guess, I was in Teacher of the Year Zoom interviews for the association for the conference. And it hit me like a truck. By the end of the day, I felt like I've been rode hard and put up wet. I had a fever, body aches, sore throat, all kinds of stuff. And being male and never having given birth, I really don't know what pain is, but that amount of pain made me feel like I was really sick. And I don't run fever. So long story short, the wife set me up with a rapid response test, and I came back positive. I'm doing a whole lot better. The reason I'm leaving a little early is I'm going to the VA hospital to get, I'm technically out of isolation, and I will get a COVID test at the VA hospital and offer my blood for their antibody test or study. As far as Final Mile goes, it may have appeared like we've paused, but the action that's going on is behind the scenes and quiet. We released RFPs for our first project about a month ago, and there was misunderstanding among some of the vendors. Long story short, we got one successful bid and project out of the 5. We reissued the RFPs. My job today will be to go pick them up from ASBA headquarters where they are. And we expect this round of RFPs will be much more successful. You can have all the good concept in the world. And we believe the CBRS solution that is the Final Mile's primary solution, although we'll do just about anything to get kids covered. Some of the vendors that we knew could provide the service and were willing to provide the service misunderstood what it was we wanted, and several did not bid on projects that would have been perfect for them. And one, a very nice outfit out of Bangalore, India, bid on one project, and they were clearly unaware that Forest Lakes is in the middle of one of the largest ponderosa pine forests in the world. And it was a solution that would not work. However, had they bid Holbrook, it would have been an ideal solution. So we're trying to sort all that out, because you can have all, like I said, all the good concept in the world, but you've got to have service providers who are willing to provide that service. So that's where we are. We hope we will pick up at least 4 additional of the 5 this week. And as I was telling Steve, I'm no longer in a leadership position for the final mile. We have a consortium. The consortium elected a fellow named Sean Rickert, who is the superintendent at Pima Unified, as the chairman of the board of directors, and a guy named Glenn Lineberry as the vice chair. He's director of Arizona Online School Collaborative and principal up at Miami Junior Senior High School.
Yeah, he presented to us, Wes, you may recall,
Yeah.
several months ago.
Glenn is really, really sharp. And if you tell him I said this, I'll deny it. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. So once my conference is over, then I will begin, I was talking to Steve, I will begin again to create awareness, find partners, find funding for the project. But that's where we are right now. So we do have one successful proof of concept, Paloma Elementary. And it's a CBRS solution that's going to light up about 36, 37 homes. The problem is they just lost in Paloma, I think 6 or 7 houses that were there once are now washed away. So it's one of those good news, bad news story. We'll be able to light up a bunch of houses, but some of those houses are no longer there. Well, anyway, that's Wes in a nutshell. I'm back, except for the fact that I have no sense of taste. I'm doing fine.
Well, welcome back, Wes. We're glad to see that you're back and wish you a speedy recovery. Okay, thank you all. So I just want to say a couple of things. I guess I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have about the final mile. And so a couple of things that were clear to me as I had conversations with Wes and also Mark, as I was looking at your report, is that there was 5 schools that were targeted for middle mile. I mean, for final mile, excuse me. And of course, that was a proof of concept. But as we all know, that there are lots of other rural schools out there that we need to be looking at and that we want to promote seeing some additional funding for. So people like Manny, who's been great about attending our meetings regularly down in Sarita, and Andrew Bevington, and down here in Pima County, and many others who are very interested in seeing rural schools getting connected, that how we can look at expanding that concept. So anyway, Wes, welcome back with speedy recovery, and let's move on with our meeting. So are there any new people who have joined us today that have not been on the call in the past? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Okay, come on. Okay, there we go. All righty. So moving on, want to remind you that, as you may know, that we've started what we're calling kibitzing with colleagues. After this meeting, we'll stay online And anybody who wants to just join, it is a free-for-all, no agenda, no presentations. Just anybody who wants to share. This kind of came about by several people a couple of weeks ago who ended up staying online and started chatting and sharing information and so forth, and thought it was a great idea, and thought we should make it available on a regular basis. And so since we don't really have the time to do that in our regular meeting, we thought we would do it afterwards. If people are interested, you're welcome to join us. If there's nobody there, then we'll just close it up. And if we continue like we did the last time, we went on for probably an hour with sharing some great information. So Kirk, you're online today. Do you want to say anything?
About what? The kibitzing?
About the kibitzing. Yeah.
Kirk is the best kibitzer. Go ahead.
Hey, Wes, welcome back. Glad you're healing. We were wondering what happened to you. We missed your humor. Steve, we just happened to stick around that one time and it worked out great. We got a lot of stuff shared. And when it works, it works. And that's pretty much all I can say.
Okay.
And thanks for opening that up for people who can stick around.
Sure. So again, you're all welcome to attend, and if there's nobody there, we'll close it up. If we continue for an hour, we'll stay on for an hour. So that's all I have to say about kibitzing. Just want to remind you again that you can find the people who are participating in the task force. There's the link. It is only those people who filled out our Google form. And if you haven't done so, please do so. I will request that every meeting. And then last thing before we move on with our updates is, again, I have an updates page with events, updates, webinars, funding resources, and so forth. It actually is about due to be updated again, but a lot of the information, including things that we talk about at this meeting, are available with contact information and so forth. So if you haven't checked it out, I encourage you every week to check out that updates page. And then with that, let's move on and with our federal and state updates. Jeff, you want to kick it off, please?
Yeah, hey, Steve. Wes, glad to have you back. I had alien abduction in the pool. So, obviously I'm losing, I don't know who had COVID, but there's a nice little pot of cash sitting there somewhere. Excited to really start heading into the fall. As you all know, we have a grant coming up in October that we're writing and going through the process of getting together right now. This is something that I'm super excited about because I think it's going to jumpstart some of our projects that have been on the books. As I've advised somebody in one of our other counties on Friday, this is absolutely the time to be getting your shovel-ready plan together, thinking about what the project is. I will tell you there are several counties and quite a few municipalities that have very interesting projects that they're putting together, that they're socializing. We're getting a chance to understand it a little bit better. Would love to learn more if you're doing something like that. We haven't heard. We have quite a bit of money coming into the program. That being said, we do have to look at this from a statewide perspective. So the ability, some of the most promising projects I've seen utilize existing infrastructure for things like the middle mile. Many of these things have been built recently with E-rate. So these are great networks, and we're excited to take to the next level. We just had our last kind of unofficial NTIA webinar. In fact, it was with the EDA earlier in the month. And we'd love to keep doing this. And what I'd like to do is to reach out to y'all, in addition to, we'll clearly have one for the upcoming grant come October, but that leaves September open in terms of what we can do.
Jeff, can you explain which grant you're talking about in October?
We're talking about we called it the Rural Broadband Development Grant last time. It was a $3 million grant that we gave. We had 3 different winners in terms of infrastructure: Payson, Page, and Bullhead City. We have quite a bit more money coming this time and expect to have a lot more winners. So there'll be a huge rollout process with that come October, including webinars. But getting back to my point, Henry, I think that we should look at having a webinar in September. I'd love to hear from you all what topics in particular are of interest. If there's a certain federal agency that you'd really like to see come in and present, USDA, somebody like that, we can work on putting something like that together. So please feel free to reach out to me directly as we look at doing this. Our program with KPMG continues to move forward. They presented some very interesting options last week, and we're having a chance to debate them internally and come out with them. We will have a fully formed addition to our 2018 state broadband plan utilizing these recommendations. KPMG has been a great partner thus far. They've already done state broadband plans in Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. I believe they're working on Iowa now, and I know there's a couple more I'm forgetting. So they're bringing a lot of perspective to this that we didn't have, and we feel very excited about that in addition to what we're doing. That's really all I had today, Steve. I do have to drop off at 8 o'clock for another meeting, but I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
I just want to emphasize that the webinars that Jeff has been doing with EDA and NTIA and all are just absolutely awesome. They're great stuff. And I do have the links to those webinars. I think most of them, if not all, are now online. And so if you didn't get a chance to participate in those webinars, again, I have all those links on our information and updates page, and really encourage you to check them out.
Yeah, we're excited.
Jeff, Mark here. So, hey, so I assume that the 100 million is now known as a solid number, and I understand the 75 is to recapitalize the grant fund that you're discussing, previously 3 million. Do you have a better understanding of the 25 million and its application to digital equity?
Yeah, that's one interpretation of the 25 million. We're still writing the rules on that, Mark. So I don't want to get too specific, but it definitely does expand the scope of what we're doing. I mean, clearly it's quite a bit more money, and we're looking to do that. You know, quite honestly, in addition to that, for those of you who follow the folks in DC, we've got a very large infrastructure bill that cleared the Senate. You know, I've said this before, I don't count on anything from DC until the president signs it, but there's another $100 million for broadband in that bill. So we're watching that pretty closely. And, you know, whether that's just going to be in addition to what we're doing or that's going to be something completely different, that's up for debate. But there, as I mentioned earlier, and Mark, you're correct, there's quite a bit of money coming right now.
Jeff, I have a question for you. Have you seen any sort of a pattern developing with counties or any other entity who's actually doing final mile connection? Does it tend to be all up and down the street cable connection, hard wire connection, or do we see any Wi-Fi CBRS like solutions going on out there for last mile hookup?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have several carriers that are what we call FTTP or fiber to the premise providers that are looking at Arizona cities, places like Lake Havasu City, Kingman, for example, up in Mojave County. I could go to the list. What we're finding, and you brought up a really good point, Wes, with your earlier update. We have a very diverse geography here in Arizona. You know, fixed wireless is a great product in certain markets, but not in others. Digging for fiber is great in certain markets, but not for others. I mean, we have a lot of rock here. We have some communities that have excellent aerial cable throughout, taking advantage of that. So the two that I'm seeing again are fiber to the premise and fixed wireless, CBRS, mesh, however you want to define the wireless component. The throughput on these networks has gotten quite a bit better in the last few years, and I'm anxious actually to see someone build one to a decent sized community. and see how it works. I'm very been in that industry. I understand a little bit, and this is a big jump forward. I think that the opportunity in those markets is great. There's still cost, but as I mentioned earlier, the ability to get costs down to an acceptable level is going to have a lot to do with who wins and who loses and who gets funded. We've had projects presented to us where folks just want us to fund their business plan, and that's probably not a good solution. We have other folks that have great products that are backed by multi-billion-dollar companies that maybe it just doesn't pencil out, and they're looking for capital to push it across the red to black line, if you will. So we're looking at all the technologies. One of the things, quite frankly, with education, if I'd have to say one trend that I'm very optimistic on, is the ability to utilize not the bandwidth, but the dark fiber, and in some cases, the extra conduit put in by E-rate. If you look at counties, Pinal County is a good example. Zayo put in a very extensive network in Pinal County. Sparklight put a very extensive network in Yavapai County. You've got a couple different carriers up in Yuma County that have put in some great in the ground or aerial network. So I would say, if anything, that's really the big trend, is take advantage of what you have, look at your geography, try to figure out what works best in your geography, and try to keep your costs down. Fiber to the premise is always going to be my preference, but in some instances, it just doesn't make sense for geography or just the demographics of the area and how they're laid out.
Well, I remind myself, and I remind others often, that the final mile is not a thing. The final mile is just a concept. And we sort of settled on initially the CBRS wireless solution based on our hope to get it in as soon as possible, get as many kids covered as soon as possible. But we are completely agnostic about what the last mile solution looks like. Jeff, I don't care if it's 2 tin cans and a string to every home. So we're more than happy to apply whatever funds we have available to help cover the initial capital cost, which we hope on the other end will allow a much more reasonable billing and a return on investment for the provider. So, just because we started out with a tower, a transmitter, and a bunch of receivers does not mean that itself is not the final mile.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question, Jeff, before you have to drop off, and this might be too specific and you might not be able to answer, but the rural broadband project that you were talking about from the ACA in October, is there any, I've gotten mixed messages about RDOF. Is it going to exclude or include RDOF? Do you know yet?
RDOF will not matter to our program. That was one of my frustrations with the NTIA program, Joy, that we all worked on, was by excluding areas that received RDOF funds that may not be built on for 5 years. It really did knock a lot of great projects off the map. Although the project that y'all had in the county is pretty awesome. So from our standpoint, we're excited. I think that we're looking forward to have a very open, inclusive grant.
Thank you. That's a big deal. That was really important for me to know. I kept getting mixed messages and I wasn't sure which way to go on that.
Yeah, that's more of a federal thing. They try not to grant money into areas that have received other federal grants. Unfortunately, the grants don't always line up the way that they think they do on paper, but that's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else for Jeff before he drops off? Okay, let's move on. Mala, are you online today?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sure can.
Okay. Again, welcome, Wes. We missed you a lot, as everybody is saying. So let me begin with, okay, I'm Mala Muralidharan, I'm the State E-rate Coordinator for Public Libraries. I work with the State Library. To give you an update on E-rate, that's E-rate funding has started coming in and has been coming in quite fast. I think because they want to get many of the E-rate applications out of the way so that their reviewers can focus on ECF, which the deadline for which was 13th of August, and they have started the review process for that. So far for E-rate, the total award has been about 2 billion, and Arizona has received 100 million of those already. That is, this has been encumbered, not received, projects that have been approved. And it's continuing. Every week we get a new wave of funding, and I'll keep track of that for you. The Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, we've crossed the 100,000 mark. We are at 103,461 households, Arizona households, that have applied so far. So those of you who have been promoting it and pushing it to the households, thank you so much for doing it. Arizona is still among the top 15 states, although the amounts that are available seems still a lot that has not been committed. $3.1 billion was the appropriation that was available for application. So far, there is still 2.9 billion available. The monthly support that has been claimed so far is 187 million, and about 8 million of those, an additional 8 million for the devices. So between the two of those categories, there's still 2.9 billion available. So please continue to promote this as much as you can. If it continues at this rate, it will last about 10 months. The funding will last about 10 months. That's how, that's my calculation, but of course, the subsequent months, one could claim more than what they have claimed in May and June. As far as ECF funding is concerned, the review process has started, but there is still time if people want to make changes to their application. They can do it, keep it ready and do it during the review phase. Of course, that means that you'll have to convince the reviewer that you made a wrong, made a data entry mistake or some errors in putting the data into the system. But otherwise, you can't have new requests put in now. I want to also talk to you about the Shelby webinar that we had last week. It was a webinar on telehealth and libraries. Talked about how libraries play a critical role in maintaining the welfare and safety of the community, especially during these COVID times when people find it difficult to get to the hospital or get a hospital bed or get to talk to their doctors. Telehealth has become really a priority, and not having internet at home or sufficient bandwidth at home to transmit images or to have a video conference with the doctor can prove difficult for and frustrating for the patients, and they could come to the library and use the library's bandwidth to connect to their doctors, which of course means that the library needs to provide them with space, maybe kiosks, and maybe even a navigator, a health navigator, or a nurse practitioner at the library. The people who led this webinar, Craig Settles, is an industry consultant, and he has published a telehealth guide to connecting library patrons to better health. And I will put that in the chat as soon as I finish talking. It was moderated by John Windhausen. And the others who presented were Michael Williams from the Indiana Library Federation, because they did some work on this. So too did Delaware State Library. And Brian Hubbard, the senior manager of customer service ENA, did a presentation about how ENA, a service provider, can help bridge the gap between the library and the doctors and the healthcare service with the technology. Very interesting, and I just want to say that we had already been thinking about it at the State Library, and I had put up a project proposal. I'm waiting to hear about the approval of it. And our project was to help mainly tribal libraries reach the healthcare goals that we are trying to provide, both by way of healthcare education, diabetes education, nutrition education, as well as connecting with their doctors through either mobile clinics or clinics set up in tents outside the library using the library's Wi-Fi. We're working on it and hope to get the grant approved and hope to get it on its way pretty soon. The Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, yes, we are following it, and it's passed the Senate. We're waiting for the next phase and waiting to see if it gets approved. I have, in the last minutes of the meeting, I broke it up for you. So those of you who haven't, who don't know what the Infrastructure Investment Act includes for broadband, please look at the minutes that Oris and Henry put together. They've done a great job, and it's available in those minutes. Any questions? Otherwise, back to you, Steve.
Okay. Holly, are you online?
Holly's not there today. She's got some other urgent contracts to sign, so.
Okay. Well, we've talked about EBB. Cindy or Tracy, either of you have anything you want to add?
This is Cindy. I don't think Tracy's on. No, I don't have anything to add today. Thank you.
Okay. All righty. I didn't see Janet. Janet, are you online? Janet Major?
Yes, bonjour, Janet.
There you are.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to share a little bit more about what Mala touched on. This is a really hot topic, and we've done some research and we've met up with other groups that are also working on providing telehealth in the libraries. And the 2 webinars last week were really very informative. They shared some links to companies that are building small soundproof booths that are affordable. They've addressed a lot of issues with regards to privacy and logistics and clinical case workflow. And so it was very exciting to hear their pilot projects and their examples, as well as they've started, librarians are so smart. They've started a group that is sharing best practices, which is just priceless for people who are building and doing something new like this. Things that you wish you would have thought of, or things that were challenging, then you can find some great solutions. So Mala and I are going to get together later this week and plan. I have a lot of great screenshots, and I'd like to share what we learned and have the conversation about Arizona. We do have the opportunity and the bandwidth in more ways than one to move forward on this type of a project and help make it happen. And I think that it would be great for us to have a conversation. So I'll share that news in a further communication, but I'm looking at Thursday, September 2nd from 12 to 1 to have a broader discussion and to share what we learned, because I think it was really fantastic.
Janet, would you send me that information if you want, folks? And I'll get the word out.
And then the other thing that's really exciting about doing this is it also provides the opportunity for us to provide some really great experiential opportunities for our students, because we start classes this week and we've got obviously a lot more simulations than we've ever had for training our medical students and our nursing students. But in the end, we need humans. We need human interaction too. So to be able to have people practice and take vitals in the library, qualified clinicians help and contribute in a way that's significant is really the future of our healthcare as well. And there's a really great blog that we just shared, and I'll put the link because it's a fantastic story. It's a nurse practitioner, family nurse practitioner who is now studying to be a doctor nurse and here at the U of A, and he's enrolled in the Rural Telehealth Certificate Program. And this is a program in which we really have made it the responsibility of students to find some experiential learning opportunities. And he signed up to be part of an interprofessional team that within a crazy amount of time distributed 3,000 vaccines at the Gallup Indian Medical Center to many people who do not speak English as their first language. I mean, you can't teach cultural diversity any better in any better way, you know, for students to get together and work amongst doctors, nurses, teachers, mentors in that population. And every night they debriefed. So this guy gave us a presentation at the Arizona Rural Health Conference, and we asked him to write a blog. He had the whole audience in tears. He was a fantastic presenter, but every evening they'd get together and debrief and prepare for the next day, and used clinical practice to learn and to teach and to demonstrate cultural humility. So the opportunities that you don't think that technology might provide are really striking, right? And everybody in this crowd, of course, knows that. And I also wanted to announce that September, the third week of September, the 20th, 19th through the 25th is Telehealth Awareness Week. So please share any events or things that you would have during that week that are coming up. An event, I'll send the link to all the great webinars we've got coming up, but an event that I know you'll be interested in is also the 5th annual HIT symposium. And Lindsay Dietz, if you wouldn't mind putting that link into chat, Jeff and I have been invited to do a panel, and the discussion will be broadband for telehealth and IT. And it's a great conference if you're interested in data technology and innovation, redesigning the digital health era. That'll be September 23rd. So there's a lot that's going to be happening to celebrate telehealth awareness. So anything we can get on Steve's calendar to be distributed would be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet. Any questions for Janet? Okay, moving on. We got to move quickly because we want to make sure we have plenty of time for Mark. Sophia, I know you're online. Do you have anything that you want to share this morning?
I don't have any major updates. We're still just trying to get as many schools who are interested on the Discovery Education platform, and then helping schools create plans to spend their federal dollars. But I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Okay. Any questions for Sophia? Mylan, I don't think you're online, are you? I think he's out of town. Okay, moving on. Leah, I saw you were online. Anything that you want to give us an update on?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Leah Marcus Peterson with the Arizona Corporation Commission. We regulate the utilities industry and then have limited jurisdiction on telecommunications. Wanted to mention that at our last open meeting, and I think I mentioned it last week, we talked about one particular telecom company and just our concern that if deadlines or extensions are approved at the federal level, that we'd be made aware at the state level. And so we voted on some reporting requirements, and I thought that was important. So we'll continue to have that conversation just because we want to see if funding is provided at the federal level, that we're actually seeing those dollars spent here in a timely manner per their contract. So that was a conversation. And I'm primarily just referring people to this task force. So great to see Heather Floyd here from Valley Telecom. I just met a gentleman from Alluvion Communications, which is a tribal telecom firm. So I'm going to shoot him a note to invite him to these Monday meetings also. So just great to see everybody. That's it from me. Thanks, Steve.
So while this isn't directly related, but so I don't forget that you mentioned Alluvion, and the USDA just invested $14.8 million in broadband in Arizona. Came from the second round of Reconnect program. And I do have a link on our page here, but USDA expects to begin inviting applications for a third round of program funds in the coming week. And the local, the Gila local exchange carrier, which does business as Alluvion, is headquartered in Chandler, and will use the funds to deploy a fiber to the premises network in rural Arizona. So that link is on our meeting page, and you're welcome to check that out. And maybe we can get them on, Leah, to actually give us an update on that project.
Great. I will connect the two of you, Steve. Thank you.
Sounds great. Okay, Derek, you have anything you want to add this morning? Are you online this morning? Apparently not. And we've already heard from Wes. So those are the major updates. I did want to mention a couple of things real quickly. and I wasn't going to say this today, but I think I will anyway, that Robert Alvarado, who many of you know, has been a participant in our task force, although we don't get to see him very often because he's very busy, but he is vice president with, excuse me, with the Chicanos por la Causa. They actually serve 5 states and are very active here in Arizona. And he contacted me that they are looking at applying for an EDA grant, and they are interested in looking at potential partners to participate. We don't know yet what that's going to look like. We're having another meeting. Derek Messeth and I met with him last week, and we're going to have another meeting on Wednesday. If any of you are interested in participating, and again, it's all up in the air right now exactly where we're going with that grant. But if any of you are interested in that discussion or possible partnerships, please let me know and I will send you the information about that meeting. Okay, with that, any other announcements or updates before we move on to Mark and his update on the Arizona Technology Council's public policy plan? Going once, going twice. Looks like you're on, Mark, and I'll stop sharing and let you share.
Good. Good morning, all. Going to talk a little about the annual public policy guide from the Tech Council. So I sit on the board and executive committee, active with the public policy group, as is Ron Schott and Mike Keeling and some others you'll know. So I've been driving the Arizona broadband policy for now almost 10 years, but we traditionally got most of our federal policy fodder from a group called CompTIA, a national technology training and aggregation of tech councils. They stopped doing that, and last year I wrote and they had only really covered a spectrum reform at the federal level, not a full palette of federal issues in the broadband area. So last year I did a pretty big lift, and I wrote, if you've looked at the excerpt, a whole 4 dense pages on the federal side, covering all the legislative and the executive regulatory side, all those agencies, and a full suite of recommendations. So that seems pretty solid still. And going year to year, we're probably making changes in the 10% range on this stuff to keep it fresh, keep it updated, accommodate new things. So I have selected 6 or 8 issues. We'll see how many we get through. I thought I would give a little background and host some discussion. So the first is federal broadband speed, and John Kelly, in fact, posted an interesting discussion on a site called Pots and Pans. POT, those both being technical acronyms, so a funny title. Broadband speeds at the federal level have gone from like 4/1 to 10/1 to 25/3, which is considered the current standard for underserved or unserved in a census block, and for grant applications and any federal funding tends to carry through at the state level. This year in the proposed infrastructure package, we're seeing that go up to 100/20 minimum and 100/100 symmetric service preferred. Lots of implications for that. Last year, we were not prescient, but we were ahead of the game by suggesting the rise from 25/3 to 100 downloads. That's in fact where things moved in California at their executive branch and are moving at the federal level. So the likelihood is we would settle perhaps on this language this year. Do I want to talk about a few, oh, that was last year's language. The Senate infrastructure bill looks for projects to deliver 100/100 symmetric service with 100/20 necessary for approval and due consideration. So issues with that, I'd like to mention, yes, we all want more. Some technologies or some communities, by their remoteness and isolation, those speeds are difficult. I won't say impossible, but difficult. Many wireless technologies will certainly have trouble at 100/100 symmetric service achieving it. The article that John Kelly posted raises the point that if you raise the underserved or unserved numbers to 100/20, America suddenly, rather than being 15 to 20% unserved, probably becomes 40% unserved, and the numbers are going to look horrible. That may be a perception problem more than an actual problem. I do want to say that John, in his response to me, said he would like to see 100 gigabits per second up and down. And it's always John's definition that broadband should be fast enough so as not to bore a 10-year-old. And so the other problem that arises is when the feds talk about reliably delivering a certain service level, let's say it's 20.53, it's virtually impossible in most situations to simply multiply that by the number of users and buy that level of backhaul. So if I had 25 down, 100 users, am I buying a 2.5 gigabit per second service to serve them at enormous costs? No, I'm scaling and figuring at the peak early evening hours, I still get to divide by a factor of 6 to 8, usually today, to say what is my average and realistic loading when everyone is online streaming at their max. Well, it's not simply 25 times the number of potential users. It's some factor below and has to be dealt that way. So I am asking in the federal guidelines for the feds to clarify the reliable broadband standard they use in light of the fact that no one really understands it. Everyone generates an explanation as to why they're less than 25 per user backhaul is usable for 25. So enough said about that. I'd like to then get any thoughts or comments from you on this issue. Then we'll move on to the next issue. But John, perhaps I've quoted you a few times. Anything to say about our proposed federal definition for the coming year? Or anyone?
Mr. Mark, my name is Fernando Roman, and I just have basically a statement, I guess. I've been installing high-speed internet for 24 years. I work for the one of the major telecommunications companies. And so we know that this pandemic has exposed gaps in broadband. And when you speak of the 10 by 100, it's going to be very, very difficult to deploy this type of technology to the rural communities.
Yes.
We know that the satellite technology does not meet those requirements. It's really expensive. We're, years and years away from the Elon Musk of the world. So right now, the major telecommunication companies, I'm not going to name them here, but you know who they are. In order to get a 10 by 100 circuit, you would have to be within, you have to have fiber, number one, to the neighborhood, or fiber to the community. And then in order to get those speeds, you have to be, less than 1,000 feet of copper cable. So the only way to deploy this product is going to be what we call GPON and or fiber to the home.
Right.
And so my concern is that, there have been other federal programs in the past, the Connect America Fund, to where these major telecommunications companies have received billions and billions of dollars with no oversight. And now with the new infrastructure bill coming in, we have an opportunity to get the job done correctly. I believe that there has to be oversight on federal monies. And if the corporations, I am in no way in a place to force these telecommunication companies to take this money. But at some point in time, if they're the only people in the communities, and they don't, and most of them, believe it or not, have an 896 kilobyte upload and 20 megabyte download, which is not sufficient to do any type of online schooling or Zoom or digital learning, remote learning. At some point in time, there has to be something stating that, number one, broadband needs to be regulated like telephone, because the infrastructure that's out there that these telecommunications companies are using, at one point in time, they transmitted telephone services on there, and now they just converted that to transmitting broadband frequency over those same lines. At some point in time, that needs to be regulated, because they're not holding these communication companies accountable. And so now with these billions of dollars coming, or millions of dollars coming to Arizona, we can't force them to take the money, but if they do take the money, who's going to oversee that?
Well, certainly when it's federal money, there are reporting requirements and metrics that they're expected to both meet and report on. At the state level, I'm hoping that our state does not actually hold grantees and potential grantees to the federal numbers. It's almost inevitable that these federal numbers are rising. Yes, they're definitely preferring fiber by that choice. I agree with you there. And there are some unfortunate aspects to it. I'm not sure how to frame a discussion, or that the feds are even interested in listening to us. But if you wanted to perhaps look at this and suggest how we might with more nuance, say things about that though the general speed expectations are rising, specific circumstances will not allow meeting of those speeds, even where good investments might be made in community broadband distribution. So thank you, Fernando. That's an excellent point, and it's a sticky wicket, as they say, across the pond.
Hey, Mark, I think this is John. I think Fernando's onto something in that there's a gap between declared speeds and quality of service. And I think that's certainly something, but let me back up for a second. The purpose of these kinds of policy statements, Mark, and
there you go.
I got muted, so somebody's messing around with me. Is to both declare policy priorities as well as to authorize the action of the Tech Council. Is that a fair point?
Yes, though our action is more relevant at the state level than at the federal level, frankly.
Sure, but still, the board of directors of the Tech Council on which you serve doesn't want your staff to go off on issues that are completely out of bounds of the policy framework, right? Okay, so that's the general point. So I think sometimes these documents tend to get too detailed, and when that happens, they end up getting a little bit sticky as opposed to aspirational or principle based. And I think my comment about 100 up and 100 down is, I think what we've learned when Fernando's.
And hear you, John.
Yeah, I got muted again. I'm watching myself go on mute without me doing anything, so I don't know what's going on. But the whole point of this last year and a half is that we all want better broadband than we've got.
Right.
And I think that's sort of what the nature of this is. And that might bridge to some of the Sun Corridor discussions we've been having over the last year, which is a lot of our E-rate discussions have been, or E-rate installations have been kind of hub and spoke approaches as opposed to, redundant ring, resilient rings. So our architecture has been episodic as opposed to strategic. And I think there's some discussion about changing the way we utilize E-rate in order to get a better overall state broadband network design. I think Derek's brought that up on a number of occasions.
Good. I'm going to take that to heart and see if I can perhaps recast language a bit in light of the problems that going to 100 meg / 20 minimum in the federal grants would. That's in the infrastructure bill, still under revision as it goes through the House and probably back to the Senate. Thank you. So I did hear on both on federal rights of way from Brad Burgess, who managed the ADOT Public-Private Partnership RFP last August summer and is involved in Arizona's deployment of new middle mile on the I-17, I-19, and now I-40, at least the Flagstaff to California piece. And so his comment was that we had some fairly good language already on federal right-of-way and how they should assist with cross-jurisdictional permitting. The problem today is you go through a whole rigmarole at each and every agency on something medium or long haul on land that may be Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Forest Service, Parkland, and so on. His specific request was perhaps something like a shot clock, which means if you don't respond to my application in 90 days, it's automatically approved. That's actually already in place, superseding municipal and county rights on the permitting of wireless infrastructure. And so I've gone back and asked Brad Burgess if he would perhaps provide specific language to improve what he thought was already a pretty good federal right-of-way. But that led me to pull up this summary of what House Bill 2596 did in Arizona this past session. And these are the 3 bullets. And I've asked Brad if any further legislative or executive branch actions here in the state would be useful. I also have a meeting late in the month with Ben Blink from the governor's office and hope to take that kind of information there. So this is a legislation that allowed ADOT to install telecommunications, allow private broadband providers use of ADOT's right-of-ways, grant access to its own conduit, and create a smart highway trust fund. Let me pause for any of this call's potential comments on both federal and state right-of-way management and easing of its use. Anyone? Not surprised it's not as touchy an issue in some ways. We all agree that both the feds and the state and municipalities where they have jurisdiction all make right-of-way difficult. You hear that consistently. There has been a trend to overwrite the city and county's authority for the good of the industry's difficulties and speed of deployment, sometimes pushback, but that's the issue we're working on there. How to ease right-of-way, especially cross-jurisdictional right-of-way.
Mark, if I can just add to this just quickly that at least in my observation, that in many cases, many of the rural communities have shot themselves in the foot because they have made their requirements so onerous that what we've heard from some of the providers that 50% of their cost is legal fees, particularly if they have to go through multiple jurisdictions. And so we've talked about this many times about how do we work with the jurisdictions to make it easier for these folks. So I just want to pick that up.
Yeah, and it's both their policing powers and aesthetic concerns sometimes, and their revenue expectations, and just the general drag that their permitting processes can bring to projects. Good point, Steve. So this actually deals more with Jeff's office. I believe Jeff has had to drop off, but we have some extensive language that was welcomed by Commerce and the governor's office in helping to define their role and strategy. We're certainly looking to refresh and renew that this year. The enormous funding streams coming from Congress already and yet to come will allow Commerce to staff up in some of the proposals up to 10 to 15%. Some of the funding flows can be spent administratively. So we certainly expect the Commerce Authority will staff up to meet the challenge in broadband, whether it's E-rate facilitation, grant applications,
Did you tell
and
me to call you,
administration.
or did I tell you to call me?
Jenny, can you please mute?
Oh, you're on a meeting. Okay.
And so obviously this has become, we lost a year to the pandemic. The state is now recapitalizing Commerce at $100 million. And we're going to rework some of this language. We're gonna try to take into account some of what's coming from KPMG. And I do talk about how they should ramp up to administer funds. Henry raised a specific point, is that this document and Commerce's work should include fundamental principles to guide the future goals of middle mile fiber deployment. I do believe, Henry, that's exactly what's happening in the KPMG strategic process, which is focused on primarily that issue. And so I'm going to rework this language a little accordingly, and just wanted to let you know what I'm doing there. We're going to talk about how Commerce ramps up to administer now hundreds of millions of dollars in new broadband funding, how they set up fair and equitable competitive grant processes, and how those align with the principles we're expecting in the new strategic plan. So let me pause again I don't want to go into unnecessarily deep details about how Commerce should run its game, but please, let's have a little bit of discussion, and Jeff's ears will certainly be burning.
Mark, so I have a couple of things. One is whether we actually had language in here, which we did, I believe, in our plan that specifically said that we needed to have a broadband office. And of course, you know, Jeff has certainly been playing that role, and with the money that's coming down, but I think it might be helpful to be very specific about wanting to have a broadband office. And related to that is clarification for folks who weren't involved in our discussions many years ago about a broadband development authority and what that might be and how that relates to a broadband office. Is that the same or different or so forth? And I'm not sure we're clear about that at this point.
Well, and that actually is baked in. I know it's hard to read my screen, but one consideration rather than recommendation is a broadband development authority to coordinate and optimize. And so, Steve, glad to talk with you a little offline about recrafting that language from more of a consideration to a recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, we're actually getting through some of this. So ourselves, me, myself, and I, and all of you, the Arizona Broadband Stakeholder Network. Well, Henry suggested referencing not only the task force, but its report from last year. Let me say that we rarely mention the publication of specific documents in this. This is not a white paper. It's something very different. And so we generally haven't, we might have mentioned the state's 2018 strategic plan, but we did actually indicates support last year of the broadband stakeholder network as it facilitates opportunities for collaboration, coordination, blah, blah. And this year, I've crafted it slightly differently with that same lead. Oops, make that go away, sorry. Adding and recommends its strategy report of 2020 as the bridge between the state's broadband plan of 2018 and the pending state update of that plan. And so I did take that to heart and enhance last year's endorsement of AZBSN. So
Yeah, I just think, Mike, Mark, you should, when you say AZBSN, I still think you should use the whole task force, because that's the focus of AZBSN right now, is this task force. So I think you should use that language. The AZBSN COVID-19 Digital Access Task Force.
Okay. Easy enough. Thank you. And then Leah was on, perhaps she still is, this section references the Arizona Universal Service Fund. We've long held now for probably 5 years or more that we recommend that the ACC review and modernize the fund, the Universal Service Fund, with its legacy of high-cost telephony areas. John Kelly responded to me recently about reestablishing something like the $8 million special fund that was complemented by the ADE's $3 million allocation. That 11 million was applied towards the federal E-rate opportunity, the 2-year special build window. So here's an issue with that. I actually tried for that language last year in the Tech Council Public Policy brief, was shot down in flames because competitive incumbents and competitive carriers are core members of the Tech Council, and they generally don't like fees like that at the ACC. And so what happened was I proposed the language for the Tech Council, was shot down, it was removed. That's not uncommon. It's a committee process, not a sole authorship by any means. However, that very same language did carry and repeat in the appear in the AZBSN task force report, and that was a major difference between those two instruments. So I don't have much hope that the Tech Council would this year accept that recommendation to restart, refund that specific thing at the ACC. What I hope to add this year to the Tech Council that will survive is how that money could or should be used. Those discussions we've had with Leah, could it be used for matching funds for grants? Now, we know that's probably under $1 million. It's not a lot of money as is. Henry suggests in his response to me, he gave me a multi-tiered response, as did John, that money could be used to support electric co-ops efforts. Again, under $1 million. Glad to have some discussion around whether or why the Tech Council is unlikely to support the restart of a special fee and fund at the ACC, and how that elsewhere may be addressed, or any other comments about the ACC's Universal Service Fund at this point.
Yeah, so Mark, again, I think that this is something that, since we don't really have the time for lengthy discussion on this today, but it really is an issue that we need to have a discussion because, as you know, Lee has been pushing for this for some reform here, and it might be helpful for us to be specific about what we would like to see. Whether or not they decide to do that is another matter, but I think it would be helpful to say this is where we think that money could best be spent. Just FYI, I did talk to Mylan the other day, and there's still a lot of that money that's left over that people have not requested yet. So just FYI about that.
Yes, and I'm with you on that. I'm very interested in coalescing around a stated position about how that money should be spent. My leaning is more towards the matching, helping meet matching funds to leverage larger opportunities. Henry makes a point about co-ops, and I'm glad to have further about how the money should be used for leverage. So point taken, Steve.
And it would be helpful that Leah put a link to the last meeting that she's involved with us with a national NARUC task force that's been looking at this and what other states have done.
Right.
And so we should really take a look at that and see what they had to say.
And we are starting to run short on time. So I'm going to move to the next one, see if we can get through at least one or two more if we drift over a little. Sun Corridor Network, I actually have had language crafted with Michael Sherman during his tenure as director. Derek likes it, he loves it, and has suggested 0 changes, that we simply adopt it. But what I pushed back on was that ASU and the tri-universities have a vision and some actions to make them players in the digital equity scene, and that we should say something encouraging and endorsing the university's role. What's happening with ASU Lighting Up the Future, what I believe was a tri-university specific run at NTIA and perhaps other funding for a multi-tiered program, studies, proof of concepts. And I've specifically gone in a separate email and asked Lev Gonick, ASU CIO, who really leads the Lighting Up the Future, Dominic Papa at the ACA, and Derek to come up with just a couple of sentences. Brevity is the goal in all this, but to go beyond this endorsement of Sun Corridor and guidance for it to something about the tri-university's emerging role in digital equity.
So Mark, again, just some language, and I think we had included it in our report.
Right.
One is, and I've had several conversations with Derek about the continued need for us to do a strategic plan for Sun Corridor Network. And it particularly became clear to me, and I had some discussion with Mylan and with Wes and Derek just recently as I started looking at your report. And part of what's not clear to me, and I think there may be some interest about the Final Mile project and how it may intersect with the Sun Corridor Network. And so I think that's a discussion that we need to have offline about how that intersects and what the opportunities are there.
Sure. And I believe the KPMG report will, if not be a tactical plan for Sun Corridor, will set the framework and strategy, but glad to continue that discussion.
And I guess I'd like to see, Mark, the language that you have towards the end, again, in our report was very specific about that we really wanted to see, and I think you say it here, but to be very specific about saying that we really see the Sun Corridor Network as becoming a really broad network for education, economic development, and particularly healthcare and education. And so I guess I just really liked for us to really emphasize that language, that that's really kind of the goal for us.
What's interesting, Steve, about that is that the Sun Corridor Network is on the threshold of having to figure out if they're going to continue to be an E-rate vendor or if they're going to be a strategic partner. And that's not entirely decided yet, but later on in this draft, I know Mark references that the Superintendent's Ed Tech Task Force and the task force specifically recommended they become a strategic partner to the state, consistent with everything you've decided. But it's going to be a little bit out of time right now to
Well, you know, John, I had that conversation, I had a fairly lengthy conversation with Mylan about that because it was his perception that they were a vendor, but they are actually a department, a department of ASU. So theoretically, they are a nonprofit entity, not even though they don't have, they are not a 501c3, and that's still a discussion. And Mylan and Derek and I have had some additional discussion about that, but
Right.
they are an entity under ASU. So they
Well,
are
really,
not-
they're under ABOR, Steve. They happen to be hosted at ASU, but they're under the Board of Regents. It's a
But either
triune.
way, they are a nonprofit entity theoretically, rather than being a competitor provider as other providers are. So
Yeah,
theoretically, that they have that capability.
they are who they need to be, but Mylan's perspective, and I'm not going to advocate for it or against it. I'm just saying that because they have a vendor code under USAC, that prevents the Department of Education from treating them with a different perspective than they treat other vendors. And that's Mylan's point.
Yeah, and I talked with him about that, and after talking with him, I think he's rethinking that. I don't want to speak for him, but I think that the point is that I know that wanting to get together with Mylan and Derek, and also perhaps Wes and the folks with the Final Mile to see if we can figure out how to resolve some of those issues.
Yeah,
And we may not resolve them in the approximately week or week and a half I have
Absolutely.
left.
You're right. You're right.
But I am open and welcoming both this conversation and what I'm hearing and submittals of suggested revisions or discussions to follow. Then Steve, I did, after our exchange late last night, build in some expectation that we will talk about the Final Mile project, generally endorse it and ask for funding sources for it to arise somehow.
Yeah.
Then just jumping.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a plan to have a cover sheet for this report that just focuses on the main talking points? Very similar to what you did to the big report.
Covers about 24 solid areas, of which broadband is just one. And so the Tech Council does a summary of like its top 5 priorities, but they tend to be angel investment tax credits or not this. So I extract all the broadband content and I put it in a document, which turned out to be 8.5 pages. But there isn't a specific broadband summary to date. Doesn't mean there shouldn't be one.
The reason why I asked that is that I'm looking at the big report, the 52-page report, and I really like those recommendations at a glance. So main talking points as a cover sheet, I think would be beneficial.
And so what I could do, it wouldn't appear in the main report, is when I build the 9-page extract of broadband, I could put a cover page on it that did something similar for just the broadband. So that's actually a great suggestion.
Thank you.
I would have to have that summary approved, but that summary would be useful.
Mark, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to decide with you all whether to dive in. What I'm going to suggest is that I provide Steve and Henry with this document and they essentially embed it in today's minutes so that you have this thinking available. And again, I'm a week or 2 away from having to lock this down. Jeff Sabatka has been assigned as my co-editor this year. Ben Blink from the governor's office has promised a late August meeting or session of some sort to review and get his work in. But we're within 1 or 2 weeks of completion. So really value what we've already done and will done. I put this link in the chat earlier. Blair Levin suggested 7 steps for the FCC, and very quickly, I think 3 of them I'm going to tackle. rethink what kinds of networks to fund. For example, the new LEO and the next generation geosynchronous satellites are coming online. Starlink got some RDOF support, 800 million. And there's a real tension about what the role is, not only of satellites, but what kind of networks, per a discussion we had earlier with the gentleman from a provider about what kind of networks could and should be funded. I think that's a sticky wicket. One smaller recommendation, and up here, there's an issue about how CAIs are treated in the current infrastructure package broadband. I think this is very important to Mala and Mylan and our communities, is that community anchor institutions are in a third priority group in that big infrastructure bill. And that's something already being trying to turn around. But in the mapping, I've always missed having the community anchor institutions that Arizona tracked more than 10,000 of and had on our state maps in the 2010 to 2014. The fact that you can go on the NTIA and FCC maps and see coverage, but not see where the institutions are, is a horrible thing. And so finally, I'm going to suggest at the federal level that the whole USAC premise and process be revisited and modernized, just like we have the Corporation Commission version. And then finally, John Kelly sent me some stuff that you'll see in the minutes relating to ADE's tech task force and some things that the Tech Council plan might do regarding that. I'm going to beg off and say that what John is raising here goes beyond the scope of the broadband sections that I write and really should elevate to Kathleen Barton and Molly Castellano, who are the editors of the whole education, workforce development, and workplace section. And I will be forwarding this with a note and copying John and Steve about the consideration by them of these kind of ed tech issues that go beyond what I consider my purview and coverage from the broadband perspective.
Mark, we need to end. We're already over time.
Yeah.
Mark, I would agree with that, but I would only point out that there's parts of the recommendations that go directly to the Sun Corridor role. So that's
right.
Relevant.
Okay. Fair point. Reconsider Sun Corridor role in above. Good.
So,
Steve?
yeah, so one last thing, Mark, is, and I'm sorry I haven't sent this to you sooner, but I would really like to see as much as possible, starting out like we did with our report, and really frame the discussion around digital access and digital equity. And really so that, and I know you've mentioned it in some places in the report, but the need for being the training, technical support,
right,
devices and all that sort of thing, that we really need to emphasize that, because we've got to continue to build that dialogue.
Fair enough. We'll continue through the next week or two until the group editor's axe comes down on my neck.
Okay, and I'll work with you and talk some more about that stuff. So I apologize that I didn't get some stuff to you sooner. So we're done for now. Again, any of you who choose to stay online and want to kibitz about anything you heard today or whatever, you're welcome to do that. I am going to stop the recording at this point. Is there any quick announcements or anything that people want to make before we end the official meeting? Going once, going twice. I will mention that Wes mentioned his conference coming up, and I will send the announcement about that conference. And it might be a really good thing for any of you who can attend that the Rural Schools Conference to try to be there. And with that,